last class period is that we were learning about like the Second Industrial Revolution and the industrialists and the robber barons and the captains of industry and things like that. So we've kind of looked at the side of who owns the businesses, and now we're going to be looking at the side of what effect does that have on the workers now. Okay? So here's what you're going to do. If you will put on the first line, if you just put like a 1 and like underline the number 1. Like a 1, underline, and then put 3 bullets underneath it. So what we're going to do is we're going to be looking at a couple of pictures. So this number 1 is like our first picture that we're going to show. Now these are going to be people who are working during the Second Industrial Revolution. And I'm going to ask you a couple questions about these pictures. There's no wrong answers unless you don't try. Or you put things like, I don't know, I don't care, whatever. Those would be considered wrong answers. Okay? So, really just try your best. It doesn't matter if you get it wrong. It's okay. Alright? So this is going to be your first picture. So I want you to go ahead and study it. Okay, looking at this picture, trying to figure out what's going on in this picture. And I will say it's a slight optical illusion. So it's a little bit weird. And I'll explain why in just a second. What I want you to do is for your first bullet, I want you to write down, what do you think their job is? What are you seeing that is their job? Just going to write that down, your first bullet. And then for the second bullet, I want you to write down, what gender do you think these people are? And then about how old do you think that they are? Oh, by the way, I guess technically I meant on that one, those were supposed to be on both the second bullet, not second and third. But that's okay. If you made that, just add another bullet. It's not a big deal. Basically, I'm just asking you to bullet it so that you're not writing a bunch of numbers and getting all confused. Okay? All right, so raising your hand, who has some guesses of maybe what their job might be? What job are they possibly? What do you think? Miner. Okay, miner. So you actually hit it right on the head. Okay? Now, one thing I will tell you about this is it's a slight optical illusion. Some people see this line right here, and they think that this area is the sky, and that this is some sort of either a skyline or possibly plants or something like that. This is the ceiling, which means that this right here above his head, that is your ceiling. Okay? I know, it's a little bit trippy on this one, I understand. But, yeah, it's a weird optical illusion. Okay? But if who's ever seen The Incredibles, either 1 or 2? Either 1 or 2 in The Incredibles. A couple people? Okay. So if you watch the end of the first movie or the beginning of the second movie, you'll notice that they have a villain. Anybody know what his name is? The Underminer. That's right. He's a miner.
I am beneath you, but nothing is beneath me.
Sure. That's what he said. I assume that that's what he said. But anyway, so he's a miner, and he has this giant thing that goes like this, and it's like a squiggly thing. I don't think that's the official term for it, but drill. Sure, that's probably a fancy name for it. So with this, though, that's what they're doing in this picture. So this is the wall of dirt, and they are drilling into this wall of dirt. Okay? So now what I want you to put for your last bullet, or if you already did the last bullet, add another bullet. What are some possible dangers that you can see in this to the workers? So what could be the problem with these two guys?
So they're guys?
They are male, yes.
Dang.
It's okay.
Yeah, how old are they?
So these guys are, well, I was going to tell you that later, but they're about between 18 and 25. It's the average. Okay. So writing down, what are some possible dangers to the workers? So write that down. If you write it down on your paper, then you could suggest it when we raise our hands. I know, but write it down. You want him to be able to think of his own ideas too.
I still just say that.
A sink?
A city,
Yeah, I know. It's a weird optical illusion, which is funny because I never noticed that, and then I started teaching this picture, and everybody noticed it. And like half the class thinks it looks like a city, and I never saw that. So, cool students being unique. All right, Kate, raising your hand. What are some possible dangers to the workers? Raising your hand. Yes.
Structural collapse.
Okay, yeah. What happens if, let's say, the mine collapses, or maybe an explosion happens, all that rock falling on you and you being killed?
Them hitting their heads on the ceiling?
Yeah, not just hitting their heads on the ceiling, because that's one thing, right? Because it's a really low ceiling. What also happens if you have a ceiling that's this low? What is his problem?
Back problems.
Yeah, his back problems. You guys ever heard of a hunchback? One of the ways that you can either have hunchbacks genetically, or just by leaning over constantly, it causes your spine to change curve. And he's probably going to be like this for the rest of his life.
A lack of ventilation.
Okay, lack of ventilation. Here's one thing, too, is that when you're doing all this dirt and this coal and things like that, all this gets into the air. It causes what's known as black lung. What's the modern day thing of black lung? Well, it's smoking causes the black lung. It's lung cancer. Okay, good. Alex, did you have another one? Same thing? Same thing? Okay, let's do one more.
Probably pretty dark and lonely down there.
So, the lonely thing, I won't do the lonely thing, but I will talk about darkness. If you are naturally in darkness for your job for most of your life, what happens to your eyes? Anybody know? They can actually go blind. If you're in darkness constantly, it won't adjust to the light, which means that when you go and get out into the light, it can't take that in, and you can actually go blind where you only see extremely white light and you can't tell lines anymore because you're in darkness all the time. Okay, we're going to do the same activity. Don't do the last one, which is the one of the dangers, because I have to explain this. I will tell you, never had anybody guess the profession correctly. If you do, I will give you a piece of candy. Okay? It's been 6 years, so I'm just letting you know. Don't get too excited. Okay, so, again, first question, what do you think their job is? Writing it down. And then 2, what are their demographics? So think about what are their ages. And yes, there is an age difference between these guys and these guys. Go ahead and put them both down. And what gender are they? I will say it's a very hard job to guess. Writing it down. All right, raising your hand. Any guesses of their job? Yes.
Do they pick coal out of rocks?
Possibly pick coal out of rocks. Other options.
Rowing, somehow powering a ship or something?
Powering a ship, maybe?
It kind of looks like a sweatshop, so I'm going to guess shoes.
Technically, sweatshop would be a broad answer of yes, but shoes possibly.
It looks like there's some sort of loom thing, so maybe they're making cloth.
Okay, we'll go 2 more guesses.
They're making buttons.
Making buttons? Blacksmiths. Okay. So, the correct answer is these are what are known as breaker boys. Now, let me explain what that means. They are basically the modern day recycling plant. So, here's basically what happens is when people start to throw away their old stuff, so their old machinery, their old cars, their old light bulbs, is that their job is to break those pieces apart, find the stuff that they can reuse, take that stuff, sell it to somebody, and they can reuse those parts. Or they could possibly melt it down. In particular, in this case, these are light bulbs. So their job is to break apart light bulbs. So you take apart the glass, the bottom part that I don't know the name of, and the filament up at the top, and that's their whole job, is you just break apart all these different light bulbs. Yes?
Happy job.
No. It was miserable. And these are 12 to 14-hour work days. And you got a 30-minute break. And you were paid typically 10 cents a day. Okay, so go ahead and on your paper, what are some dangers? By the way, the ages, any guesses here? Just shout them out.
12.
10 years old. 10. And then these are your managers who are 13. 13. Okay, so go ahead and write down what are some dangers that you see here. Dangers that you see. Dangers that you see. Yes. Oh, well. Okay, what is an example of some dangers you might see?
They can cut their hands on the glass.
Okay, cut their hands on the glass or possibly on the metals, which, by the way, when you cut yourself or get stabbed by something metallic, what is another thing that could happen to you? Tetanus. That's why you're supposed to get your tetanus shot, which, by the way, make sure you get that. The whole idea of like this metal stuff, people got tetanus all the time back then. I knew a guy in my AP Calc class, he stepped on a nail, didn't have a tetanus shot. He spent a year in the hospital. They were unsure if he was going to be able to have his leg saved, and they were able to save it after about a year and a half in the hospital of being able to rehab it because tetanus just overtook his blood. He got blood poisoning.
Lucky guy.
Not lucky.
Well, at least he kept his leg, right?
He did keep his leg. What? So tetanus, and I'm not a genius on tetanus, but tetanus basically, so when you like open up some sort of a thing and you have like the rust that's on the metal, is that it basically poisons your blood. And then the biggest problem is it's similar to Iron Man. Iron Man actually does have some scientific realities in it, because in Iron Man, the whole idea of the metal getting to the heart, that's basically what happens in this tetanus, is eventually it can lead all the way up into your heart. It can cause your heart to stop because it causes the poisoning.
Wait, so
you can look it up later.
That's not like factual? That the rest of Iron Man isn't like factual?
Well, the rest of Iron Man may or may not be factual. Okay. All right. Other issues here. Raising your hand. Yes.
You don't know what's in the garbage, so there might be like poison.
Yeah, it could be a bunch of stuff in and out of this thing. Are they wearing gloves probably? No, probably not.
Probably get really boring down there.
Okay, yes, it could be boring. Okay, what else? Yes.
Do they get beaten with those sticks?
Yeah, so that's actually one important thing. So if you look at this stick right here, now in terms of why it was supposed to be used, is it actually at the bottom has a metal bar. So if anything were to like fall over here, he could push it back towards these people right here. However, what's another thing happens? If these people misbehave, what's going to happen? Smack them. There's no laws against it, so why not? One more thing I want to point out too is, first off, what are they all wearing? Hats. And what else? Coats. Okay. So, do they have any sort of heaters? No. Okay. So you have that problem too. The other thing is too is if you notice up here, all this dust, what's that going to cause?
Lung cancer.
Lung cancer and the black lung. Exactly. Okay. Here's the next one. Probably the most famous picture from this time period of industrialization. So same exact thing about how old and what do you think their job is? This picture, by the way, is probably one of the top 25 most famous pictures in American history.
Really?
Yeah.
What's the topic called?
Well, it depends on what you ask. I think most people would consider, and we'll see it, Migrant Mother from the Great Depression. I would say is probably one of the most popular. We'll look at that when we get there, though.
What about George Washington?
Well, George Washington was too old to be in photographs.
Lincoln.
Well, Abraham Lincoln only has like 2 photographs of him. All right, Kay, with your fingers, I want you to guess about how old these kids are. With your fingers. So it's 10 or less. Okay, putting your fingers up, putting your fingers up. Putting your fingers up.
Yeah.
Hold on. Okay, thank you. Okay, they are 7. So 7 years old. Okay. All right, now these are both boys, and we'll talk about why specifically they are not girls, and we'll talk about why in a second. However, what product do you think they're making? Textiles, wool, something along those lines. So this is a giant loom, and I kind of want to explain what they're doing, because it's, unless you know about these looms. So there's 3 parts to this loom. The first thing is that this is going to be the power belt. So this is what's basically powering this loom. Here, though, you have a basket, and basically what this basket does is they put their feet on each side, and basically they rock it back and forth with their feet like this. And every time you rock, the looms open up and show the different threads. And basically what this is doing is you can see, is there a broken spool? Is there a broken line? Is there something in a knot? Something like that. If you go to see that, here's what you have to do. You have to stick your hands inside of the loom, fix that problem, and pull it out before the loom begins again, which is about every 10 to 15 seconds. So let's say that something gets broken. You have 10 to 15 seconds to put your hand in and out. Reason why they're kids is because smaller hands. Easier to get in and out of the loom. So go ahead and write down what dangers might happen. And black lung is not the answer for every single one. All right, so let's go to some of the obvious ones here. Okay. So first off, are they wearing any shoes? No. Nope. Okay.
Splinters.
So, yes, there could be splinters. So if you notice right here, you got these feet. What happens if you slip and your foot goes into the loom? What happens to your foot?
It gets munched.
Yeah, it's probably not going to be just munched. It's probably going to be chopped off because these looms are going in and out, so you have that off. What happens if you don't take your hand out in time from the loom? Chopped off, gone, whatever it could be. The vast majority of textile workers have to retire at 25 because they're so disabled from losing so many limbs that they can't work anymore. Oh, and by the way, if you get your arm or your leg chopped off and you can't work anymore, do you get like workman's comp?
Probably not.
No, there's nothing. Basically what you get is you get fired. You get told, don't come back, you can't work for me anymore because you don't have the ability to work. Yes? How much do these guys? Well, these are kids, so they're probably going to be paid that usual 10 cents a day, maybe. That's probably going to be about what they're at. However, an adult, you would have to pay $1 a day. So you can pay children less than an adult. There's no law that says you can't. Now, one other thing, too, is if you notice, is that all of this textile, all of this babas and stuff are white. If you get blood on that, that comes out of your last paycheck. So if you have something that gets chopped off and you get blood on everything, they're taking that money out because that's money that you destroyed because you bled all over it. Now, if you notice, neither of these kids have any hair. This is about to get slightly gruesome, so I'm just letting you know. Okay?
They don't have any hair?
Yes, and there's a reason why. Most people shave off their heads. In particular, females shave off their heads. Why would that be?
Long hair.
Long hair gets yanked in. So what happens is there's a reason that they're mostly going to be male in the textile factories. And if they are female, they'll either have their hair completely up underneath a hat or they'll have it shaved off. One particularly gruesome primary source that I was reading about, there was this girl, she was 11 years old. She'd been working at the textile mill for about 2 years. She was walking past one of the looms and one of the belts caught her hair and pulled her into the loom. It scalped her from right about here all the way up to right about here on your forehead. Took it completely off. They didn't call the doctor or anything like that. They said you could take your 30-minute lunch break. So she goes into the back room to take her 30-minute break and dies of shock because she was completely scalped. And there's no like paying the family because you lost your kid or anything like that. That just gets completely taken right off. Yeah. So yeah, you don't want long hair in a loom environment. Okay, next one that we're going to do. This one's also somewhat of an optical illusion. No. There are some answers that might be more right than others.
There's nothing wrong.
Yeah, but there might be ones that are more right. It is confusing what's behind him, but there are some clues that you can at least guess what could be. Remember, think how old he is. All right, so with your fingers, go ahead and hold up. How old do you think this kid is? Holding it up. Okay, he is 3. He is 3. Yeah, so he's 3 years old. Now, most people, when they look at the background, they think a couple things. They think, is it cotton? No. Is it water? No. Is it snow? No. It's none of that. It is fish.
Let's go.
Okay? So what you're seeing right here is he is a seafood processor, which basically means the giant pile of seafood that's been brought in, his job is that he separates the fish from the shrimp, and that's his job, moving them back and forth. So in these buckets, he would put a bunch of shrimp and a bunch of fish, put them into different piles, and that is basically his job. So I want you to first write down what are some dangers to him. So what are some dangers to this kid? Again, there are more right answers. There's like certain ones that are more right than others. Okay. Okay, coming back together. Yes?
Oh, I was just gonna say one of the things.
Okay, what is it?
Oh, it's like he's on the docks and he's not wearing shoes, so he could get really cold feet and like get pneumonia.
I'm going to take you a little bit away from the cold feet part, but it is something really important about not having shoes on. Okay? A couple things. First off, underneath this is wood, so what could you get? Splinters. But it's even worse than that. You see all this dead fish, all of these dead fish, all the blood soaks up into the wood like a giant sponge. That blood does not come out, which means that if you get a splinter, what else is going up into your body?
Fish blood.
Fish blood, probably from months earlier.
Omega-3 fatty acid.
So, you have that problem right there. Another issue, too, is if you notice, he has blood all over him. Okay, so you're having all that blood and things like that. There's no safety equipment for him whatsoever. Now I want you to think, and I want you to write down for getting an extra bullet on this one. What about you as the consumer? So you go into Red Lobster and eating this stuff. It's in this picture. What's some possible issues for you?
Gross, kids.
Well, write it down.
3-year-olds can lost.
You guys are killing me today. Right after the break, you guys are different. Okay, so first off, with no shoes on, all this down here is lost money. Okay? So they're not going to lose money if he's sitting there stepping all over it, which means if you go to Red Lobster, what are you getting? All this stepped on, yummy, delicious shrimp that the kid stepped on. Yeah.
But it's cooked, so there's no diseases.
That's not how that works. You can still get like E. coli, salmonella, all that stuff you can still get from cooked food.
Depends how well.
Okay. So, you have that problem. Hey, shh. Look up at me instead of looking at your friends. Okay? So, okay, stop. It's so annoying. Okay? Want to get through this, and we're already behind. Thank you. So, what happens is that not only do you have problems with you as a worker, but also you as a consumer. We're going to go ahead and do one more. And I'll go ahead and give you the profession on this one. They're making steel. Okay, so in this one, if you don't know, steel melts at several thousand degrees. Okay? Now, if you notice right here, is this very even ground? No. So what happens if you trip? You fall into the vat. And are they really going to stop this assembly line to pull you out? No, you're dead anyway, so there's no point. So what's going to happen is they'll leave your body in there, you'll melt away, and then somebody one day is going to go drive their car, their little Model T, not realizing that your melted body parts are all up in that steel. Okay? Happen more often than you would think, to be 100% honest. Yes. And they didn't say that exactly, but they just said somebody fell into the vat. And, I mean, you can't pull out their body. It's thousands of things. So are you going to throw away? That's a lot of money right here. You're going to be throwing away. Okay? Now, as you guys can see from all of this, all these working conditions are going to be really, really severe. And what happens is that during the Gilded Age, these workers are going to be in really bad conditions throughout the United States. One example of that is what is called a sweatshop. Now, you know this term. This is, by the way, on your notes. So we're on to our notes, getting your highlighters and all your fancy stuff. Okay? Now, with these sweatshops, is that people are going to begin to work in these really, really bad shops and areas. Please stay off your cell phone. Okay? So what happens is that basically these poor working conditions are going to create some really bad environments, especially for immigrants. The reason why is because people are going to be in these really bad conditions with very, very low pay. And if they complain, you find another job. And if you don't like it, you find another job. There's no requirement to keep you on if the conditions aren't very good. Now, there's one major event, though, that kind of is like the example of poor work conditions. And if you will make sure to star it, it's the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire. So, starring the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire. So, basically, with the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire, this is going to be the example of why things were so bad. So, if you'll write next to it, example of poor working conditions. Example of poor, make sure you're writing this down. Example of poor working conditions. So let me kind of explain what happens. Now, shirtwaists are basically like a basic garment. So people would wear these shirts, women. The top would be really broad. The waist would be really cut in. It would make people look really, really thin. Well, the thing is about this shirtwaist factory is that the shirtwaist factory is going to end up catching on fire. Now, what happens is that when you're in the shirtwaist factory, it's cramped with hundreds of workers, and they're right next to each other. The other thing is that these are going to be the cutters. Basically, they're going to cut out the pattern for these shirts. Well, as they're cutting and they're getting scraps, they're just throwing these shirts and these scraps onto the table. The problem is that all of these shirts, what's the thing about cotton shirts and fire? Yeah, it's basically fuel for fire, right? So they're creating these giant amounts of fire starters right here on these different tables. Now, why the fire starts, if you like conspiracy theories, one thing about this company that owned this is that in April, that was always the slow season for them. Nobody was buying shirts in April. And conveniently, every April, a small fire would break out at the factory, and they would receive a big insurance check of $5,000 to $10,000. Which could be several $100,000 in today's money. Now, it just happens to be that about 7 years in a row, they had these fires break out around the same time every year and collected the insurance money. So is there a possibility they intentionally set it? Possibly. What we do know, though, is that a cigarette was lit, flicked onto this right here, and it's not going to burst into flames. Now, the thing is about this is that the first floor where the fire breaks out, which is this bottom floor right here, most people were able to get out. They saw the fire starting. They go to leave. They have to inform this other one, which has about 500 workers in it, that there's a fire underneath. Now, they did try to warn them. One way that they had this, and this was a real technology, it was like an original fax machine. So basically what happened is you had a notepad and a pen, and you would try to write down on this notepad what happened, and it would actually, above you, another pen would write down on a notepad exactly what you had just written. But nobody trusted the technology, and so even though this floor received a note saying that a fire had broken out, nobody was there to watch it, and nobody knew that a fire underneath had broken out. So for 45 minutes, a fire is going on underneath here. Nobody above realizes it, and the fire is now going to grow and break out in the next floor. Now, because of all this flammable material, the place is going to burn up. But you're like, oh, you can just escape, right? Well, here's a couple of problems. Number one, These are all immigrants. The issue with that, do they all speak English? Nope. So if somebody's yelling at you in Russian and you speak Yiddish, are you going to know what's going on?
No.
No idea, right? So nobody knows where to go. The second problem is that the factory workers didn't like the idea of their workers taking breaks. It used to be that people would go out on like the fire escapes or out in the stairwell. They would go get a bite to eat or they would go smoke. And they didn't like that. So instead, they locked all the fire escapes. So all the doors to escape were all locked between the working hours. So imagine if you're at Skyline, a fire breaks out, you guys all go to run out the doors and all the doors are locked. Right? That's part of the problem. And you can't go through the window because look how high you are. You're 9 stories tall. Now, the good news is that there were some people who knew about the fire, and that was the business owners. The business owners were on the top floor. They recognized that there was a fire. They calmly walked to the roof, put a ladder between 2 of the buildings, walked across. They did not tell their secretary as they walked past her. She died in the fire. But they walked across to safety. Nobody let the people know underneath that there was an escape up. Everybody thought that all they could do is go down, and there's no place for it. The other problem is, too, that some people were able to push out and go on to the fire escapes. But here's another problem. Those fire escapes didn't have regulations. It didn't matter what material they were made of. They were made out of iron. And if you don't know anything about iron, iron is able to mold at about 600 degrees Fahrenheit. Fire goes up to 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit, which means when somebody steps on it, what's going to happen? It all melts and falls apart. So now you have people trying to escape onto a fire escape that, one, only went down 3 stories. So imagine having a fire escape that can only allow you to go down to the 6th floor, and they all broke. So now women are trying to figure out how to be able to escape. And if you've ever seen a cartoon, you'll know that back in the day, firefighters had these giant nets that they would hold out and people would jump into them and land in them. Have you guys seen that in the cartoons and things like that? So that was a real thing. Problem is, that works from 2 stories, not 9 stories. So what happens when they hit that net? They literally fall straight through as if there's no break. And by the way, I'm just warning you, dead body pictures. Dead bodies. Okay? So what happens is that all of these girls begin to massively fall to their deaths. Now what happens is overall, almost a third of all the workers on that floor are going to die in this fire. The vast majority of them are so burnt that they can't even recognize them. And what happens is that these are immigrant workers. They didn't know their names. There's no record that these people existed. Maybe a first name. They don't know who the families are. So they take these bodies, they go where the current Ellis Island ferry is, and they go and they put them out on this ferry dock, and they say, families, come and get your people. About 168 people that are going to die in this fire. 25,000 show up to view the bodies. The reason why is because people were curious. Why did this happen? Why did all of these girls die? Well, what happens is that people begin to investigate this fire. Turns out that the place had been always a huge problem in terms of danger. Several different safety violations, things like that. Well, back then, when you had a building inspector, the building inspector never actually had to go to the location to say it was safe. All he had to do was talk on the phone to the business owner, say, hey, is your building safe? Yeah. Okay. Sign it off on a piece of paper. The building inspector hadn't visited that building in person in about 5 years. So had no idea of these different safety concerns and things like that. And so people start to say, this is going to be our calling card. This is going to be how we are going to change the way that immigrants are going to be. And we'll talk about later of how they end up changing that. Now, if you'll make sure to bracket from sweatshops down to the word settlement houses, if you'll bracket that and put the word immigrant. Now, these are all examples of how the immigrants are going to be living in these different areas. Now, there is a really good positive, and that is what is known as the settlement house. And this is a star term. And in particular, you need to star the word Jane Addams. She is on the key concept, specifically her name. So you need to make sure you remember her name. Now, what happens with these settlement houses is that women are going to begin to want to help these immigrant populations. Now, if you will highlight that these are going to be middle-class, native-born women, And then your second bullet, if you will at the very end, do new immigrants. Basically what these houses are going to do is that these houses are going to provide free services for immigrants coming in. Now you don't just go off into the world and hope that you can make it. What they're going to do is they're going to teach you how to get a job, how to sew, how to cook, how to speak English, how to be able to read and write. They're going to teach you all the skills that you need to have to be able to become a better immigrant into the United States. And what happens is that as immigrants come into the United States, now they know things. Now they're not just being thrown to the wolves and hoping that they survive in a new culture. If you want to compare this to today, a lot of European countries do this. So like Germany, Sweden, Finland, when you come into their country for a year, they provide you free classes in their native language. They provide you culture classes, customs classes, so that you can be able to learn the ways of that country and not just be thrown in and said, okay, be Finnish, good luck. Okay? They actually are able to help provide you. So if you'll write down next to this section that this provides or basically creates a better immigrant population. So again, creates a better immigrant population. So basically what this allows you to do is now these people can read, now these people can write, and it ends up working out a lot better for them. Now Jane Addams is going to be the major reformer of this. She's in Chicago, and she is going to advocate for the creation of what is known as the whole house. So on your last line, if you will highlight Jane Addams' whole house, it's in Chicago. And it's going to be probably the most famous out of all the settlement houses. It was very successful for several years. However, the whole house is haunted.
It is?
It is. And I thought maybe we should have a story time. A historical story time. A totally 100% true story. You guys want to hear a true story about how the whole house is haunted?
Yes, we do.
Yes. Okay. And if you said no, I'm going to tell it to you anyways. Now, the good news about this story is that this story is one that most people never forget from my class. And, if you're on the AP exam and you know literally nothing, you could always just write about the devil baby and hope that it relates to the essay topic. Even if it's like an American Revolution. If you know nothing, just try it because you never know. It could apply. Last year it applied to one of the essay questions and somebody wrote about it, so that was good. And they did actually get a 5, so it worked out. Okay, did you have a question? Okay, so let me tell you about the whole house. You see, the whole house is haunted. A lot of people say that, so this is a picture from the whole house. You can see the ghost right here. Okay. A lot of people say that these are the ghosts of immigrants who visited the whole house who want to continue to live there forever. However, the other problem is that at the whole house is the story of the devil baby. So I'm going to teach you about the devil baby today. Now let me explain what happens with the devil baby. You see, once upon a time, in the mid-1910s, an immigrant from Italy is coming over. It's about a 2-month ride across the boat from Italy to the United States. She goes over to Chicago. And when she arrives in Chicago, she realizes that she is 8 months pregnant. And she had no idea that she was ever pregnant. All of a sudden, one day, her belly grew, and she became 8 months pregnant. Yes. Now, what happens is that she feels like this pregnancy is feeling kind of weird. Like she feels like her stomach is moving more than usual. There's like these sharp stabbing pains and things like that. And so she goes into labor in the whole house. And she goes to give birth. And the labor is very long and painful and awful. And nobody can really figure out why. She has a really high fever and different things like that. And when she goes to give birth, they take the baby, they hold it up, and it turns out she birthed the devil. Oh. Now, I have a picture of that devil baby. And I'm just warning you, it is very scary. Do not be alarmed. It is just a picture. It is not the real devil baby. Okay? Did you guys like to see a picture of the devil baby? Okay. Don't be scared. It's just a picture. Okay, ready? That's the devil baby. Okay, now it has been colored to help you be able to see it better, because black and white obviously is a little bit difficult. So the baby, as you can tell right here, gets born with these black eyes, with horns and things like that. In fact, the Italian immigrant mother was so shocked by when this baby came out, she said, "I cannot believe I birthed the devil," and she dies of shame a few minutes later. Now, guys, somebody died. It's not very nice to laugh. Okay? I have one more picture, by the way, of the devil baby. Okay? So this is your picture. So this is the original picture right here. This is the colored version, if that helps you give an idea of what the devil looks like. So you can go share with all your friends. Now, what happens is that this mother of the immigrant dies, but obviously they have to continue to help this person in the whole house. And so the whole house is going to begin to grow the devil baby. Now, or help the devil baby be able to grow up. Now, what happens is that this baby grows up extremely fast. In fact, when it turns 1 year old on its birthday, it is the size of a 6-year-old child. Now, as the devil baby comes into the whole house, several weird things begin to happen. Small little fires break out, or people begin to get sick who weren't normally sick. And all these little things begin to happen at the whole house, and people start to suspect maybe it's the devil baby. Now, what happens is that on its first birthday, something terrible happens. A large fire breaks out at the whole house, and 5 people die from a mysterious illness. The owner of the whole house decides maybe it's not a safe place for the devil baby to be at the whole house. They banish the devil baby. The devil baby then curses the whole house for the rest of eternity. Now,
The devil baby look like as an adult.
well, we don't know because it got banished.
Wait, they just let it go?
They asked him to leave, yeah.
A 1-year-old?
Well, but it's a 1-year-old that's the size of a 6-year-old.
Size?
A 6-year-old can size matters.
So you guys are overthinking it just a little bit. So what happens is that the whole house banishes the devil baby leaves, and the whole house goes back to normal. Now, on your piece of paper, this is what I want you to do in the space that you have. Now, while this is a 100% true, real story, some people might say it was made up by people in Chicago. I want you to think, based on what you know about immigration and what you know about feelings of immigrants at this time, why do you think people in Chicago would create, if it was created, this story of the devil baby? So what I want you to write down is, why would the story of the devil baby be created? What would be the goal of this from people in Chicago? So you should be writing this down on your piece of paper. The paper that you're turning in at the end of class, so the one that has all your writing on it. Not your notes. So again, why would they create this story of the devil baby? All right, so who wants to try to raise their hand and tell me, why do you think people in Chicago would have created this devil baby story and published it?
To create feelings of anti-immigration.
Yeah, exactly. It's nativism, right? Think about it this way. If you allow Italian immigrants into America, what are they going to do? They're going to have the devil. And there's going to be devil babies everywhere. And then everything's going to be on fire. And everyone's going to be cursed, right? And everyone's going to die. That's what people felt like in Chicago after hearing this story. Oh, you're an Italian immigrant? You're pregnant? Well, you're probably going to have the devil. So I don't like you. Yeah.
Where did that picture come from?
The newspapers. This was published in newspapers.
And use the camera.
Yeah. Okay, so what happens is that people begin to fear immigrants. Now, a lot of this is based on Christianity and Protestantism, right? In Christianity, what's one of the major concerns that people have? Is the devil, right? Nobody likes the devil or Satan or devils. That's the whole exorcism thing and things like that. So people have this fear of it. So what happens is, this works. In Chicago, people stop donating to the whole house. People stop volunteering at the whole house. People are scared of the whole house. And what happens is, only a few years later, the whole house actually completely shuts down and goes out of business. Okay?
So in a way, the devil baby did curse the whole house.
It did. Yeah, it caused it to close. Now, you can go and still visit the whole house. It's about $30 for an hour tour if you'd like to go around. Also, if you would really like to, the location where the devil baby was born, you can actually stay in that room overnight. It is $2,000 a night, and it's booked 2 years in advance. So, if you would like to go stay, ask your parents' permission, because it's kind of like PG-13 rating, and then you can go in and you can go to the devil baby's room and live there. Okay? Now, as we continue on, so this is again an example of that anti-immigrant kind of community. You also have something known as the melting pot. Now, if you will double star this, double star the melting pot, it's a really important one that you might have heard in politics or might have heard it come up by certain people, especially right now in our government. It's actually talked about a lot. So let me explain what a melting pot basically is. Now, there's two different versions of a melting pot. This is like the modern day, what a lot of people say about the United States is. As immigrants begin to come into the United States, each of them are like an ingredient in a giant stew. Okay? So if you think about it, pretend you're making beef stew. You got carrots, you got potatoes, you got celery, spices. You put them all into this big pot. And while separately they might not taste that good, together they make something delicious and great. So the idea of the melting pot in a positive way is that as these immigrants come in, so the carrots are the Italians and the beef is the Germans, whatever it could be, as it comes together, it creates this giant melting pot of this really great stew that is America. So basically what it's saying is it's creating a better America by creating an America that has more cultures and traditions from people all around the world. However, is that how people view immigration during the 1900s and 1800s? No. People are fearful of it. Remember the devil baby? So they have this over here, and if you see at the very top, it describes it well. It says, we can't digest the scum. So now, instead of having all these delicious ingredients getting thrown into the pot, you have these random bad ingredients, like communism, anarchy, Italians, Catholicism, things like that coming into the United States. Okay, listen. Now, one thing I will tell you of why this is on here is because this is a post-World War I political cartoon. That's why it's there. Now, if you compare this in today's world, for our people of fear of immigrants, if you were to have somebody with a fear of immigrants create this pot today, after 9/11, it would say things like terrorism, or it would say things like illegal immigration, job threatening, Muslim, anything along those lines. That would be what's thrown in this pot today. Now, this is the very anti-immigrant perspective, and this is the perspective that's going to be in the late 1800s. People are going to say that these immigrants are being bad to our society. So what you need to know is the perspective of this time of the melting pot is a negative one. Okay, basically all these ingredients are being thrown in and is not good for the United States. It is making a bad stew of America. That's basically what that means. Now that brings us to a term that is a double star, absolutely must know, has been talked about on the AP exam a ton, almost every single year. Okay? And I will let you know that you're not going to like it. It's going to make you possibly angry. And I'm just letting you know beforehand. It's not going to feel comfortable as we talk about this. Okay? So, let me explain what social Darwinism is. Have you ever heard of this guy? Charles Darwin. Okay? If you've ever taken a science class, you've probably heard of a guy named Charles Darwin. Now, he goes down to the Galapagos Islands. He goes and starts researching different animals. His famous one is the finch. He realizes that there are 4 different beaks in different finches. The finches that have the big beak can't survive. They can't go and get nuts and seeds and things like that, and they begin to die off. Other birds have adapted and created longer, shorter beaks that allow them to be able to get what they need in order to survive. This is what is known as survival of the fittest. Now what happens is this whole idea of adaptation, evolution, things like that, creates this idea of basically there are certain breeds that are better than others based on how well they adapted to the environment. Now what happens is people take this idea of Darwinism, evolution, advancement, things like that, and they're not going to use it for racism. So let me explain. Every one of you when you are born is born with a specific shape of a skull. That's why when you see CSI or things like that, and they say things like, this person was a white 40-year-old male. They know this because of the shape of your head. All of you have different skull shapes based on where you are from, whether you are from Asia originally, Europe, Africa, whatever it could possibly mean. Basically what this says is everybody has a different skull shape. There's a difference between my skull shape and an African American skull shape. Because of this, the minute you are born, it does not matter what you do in your life, you are biologically less of a person because your head shape is different than mine. Okay? Now, for example, the skull size of being able to hold the brain is typically largest in somebody who has a European descent. Therefore, this person has a smaller skull, therefore a smaller brain, therefore is not as smart or as advanced as I am because I am white. And it does not matter how hard you study. It doesn't matter if you go to Harvard and get a doctorate. You are less than me intelligence-wise, physical-wise, everything because of your skull shape upon birth. Basically what this is and what you need to know for this term, this is biological racism. Saying that the minute that you are born, it's already been decided that you are lesser of a person than myself. Now, this right here, if you will highlight on your paper on the first bullet, it says racial superiority. Racial superiority. So basically what this is saying is you are lesser of a person. Now, this isn't just with African Americans. You can also see this as well. This one right here, two people who are white, Irish, and somebody who's going to be from Europe or England. If you notice, this head shape is different than the person who is from England. Therefore, you are biologically less of a person than me because your skull shape is different. Even though we are the same color and don't live that far apart, because you are Irish and I came from, let's say, England, you are biologically less than me. Now, here's one more thing I want to point out because a lot of you are like social media people and you might have seen something that you might not know is being used in a certain way. So one thing about this is that with this skull shape, people start to look into chimpanzees, and they have this skull. And even though somebody who's white does not have that much different of a skull, they say, well, that's similar to somebody who's African American. And so what happens is you have people, for example, who with Obama when he was president would post a picture of Obama, and then right next to it put a picture of a chimpanzee or a monkey. Or they would put a picture of Obama and a bunch of little bananas underneath it. There's a reason that they are doing that, and it is not a good reason. Okay? That's specifically playing off this idea of this social Darwinism idea that you are related to somebody else and you are not as intelligent as somebody who is a white Anglo-Saxon. Does this make sense? It's really bad. This is really bad stuff. And there are still people who believe it, who believe that based on your skull shape, you are smarter or dumber depending on your skull shape. Although scientifically this has been proven incorrect. Your brain size isn't naturally smaller because of your skull shape. Just so you know. Also, a smaller brain does not mean you are not as smart as somebody else. Okay. So, assimilation. To understand assimilation, we are going to watch a short video. And it does not have captions because it's from the 60s. So, as we watch this video, I want you to think, what do people naturally do in social situations? So again, that's what you're doing, is what do people do in social situations? Just thinking for a second.
The gentleman in the elevator now is a candid star. These folks who are entering, the man with the white shirt, the lady with the trench coat, and subsequently one other member of our staff will face the rear. And you'll see how this man in the trench coat tries to maintain his individuality, but little by little, he looks at his watch, but he's really making an excuse for turning just a little bit more to the wall. Now we'll try it once again. Here's the candid subject. Here comes the candid camera staff, 3 of them at least. And this man has apparently been in groups. Here's a fella with his hat on in the elevator. First he makes a full turn to the rear and Charlie closes the door. A moment later, we'll open the door. Everybody's changed positions. moment, on Charlie's signal, everybody turns forward. Notice they take off their hats. And now, do you think we could reverse the procedure? Watch.
Okay, so on your piece of paper, I want you to write down, according to this, what do most people do when they're in a social situation? What did he do or they do when they were in this situation? On the paper you're turning in. All right, who can raise their hands and raise their hand and tell me what did they do in this social situation? What happened?
They tried to fit in.
Okay, they tried to fit in, right? You don't ever want to be the lone one out. Now, some of you are very comfortable, or very able to be an individual, right? Where you go off and you don't care about what other people think. You're just like, I'm going to go do my own thing. What do most people do, though? Most people want to blend and conform, right? They don't want to be this individual, okay? So, for example, that's why we have things called, like, trends, right? People begin to have trends of what they wear or what they use or what they put on Instagram or whatever. Other people compare themselves to other people. What did you get for Christmas? Did I conform to what everybody else does? Do I play the same video games or watch the same movies that everybody else does? We naturally begin to do that. During this time period, we begin to have what's called assimilation. If you will highlight characteristics change to become part of the major culture, we want our immigrants to assimilate. We want them to become just like us. Don't bring your own culture in. Assimilate. Become an American. Let me give you an example. So, when I was in high school, I was taking AP Calc, right? And where I'm from, in Boise, this is a fun fact, it's one of the largest centers in the United States for refugees and asylum seekers. That's where they get sent to after they gain asylum in the United States. So I was sitting in AP Calc one day, and our counselor comes in, and he has two girls behind him who are refugees that came over with asylum from Afghanistan. And they're like, okay, they're in this class now. They don't speak any English. They don't know anything about the United States. They've been there for 2 days, and they're thrown into AP Calc. Okay? Now, part of this is you have to go to school, and, it was in the middle of the school year. Where do you put them? They threw them into a class that had room and things like that. But what happens is that a couple months later, we're in the middle of a test, like a really, really important test, and these girls still do not know really any English. And in the middle of the class, a cell phone rings, and it's her cell phone. She picks it up and just starts talking. Like it was no big deal whatsoever. Now, when they asked her later, they're like, well, why did you do that? Like, this is America. We don't just answer our phones in the middle of a test. And they're like, that's not a problem in my culture. In my culture, we can answer our cell phones. We can leave class in and out. It's not a big deal for us. Why is it so different here? Well, what did the classroom want? Right? Conformity, right? Become the same as everybody else. So what happens is that we want to assimilate these people into our own culture. Become Americans, speak English, things like that. Well, what happens is that this causes an Americanization to occur. Now, what you need to do is you need to highlight attempted to assimilate immigrants and have them conform into American culture. So this is the idea of you need to stop speaking your language and speak English. Okay? When you work for me at my factory, doesn't matter if you grew up Italian, you've only been here 2 weeks, you're going to speak English or you're not going to speak at all. What happens is we attempted to assimilate these people into American culture, but really it becomes a little bit of a failure. A lot of those immigrants did not want that. They wanted to retain their own culture. Now, Chinese immigrants in the late 1800s, what you need to know for this is if you will highlight Chinese Exclusion Act. So highlight Chinese Exclusion Act. And this is a really important piece of legislation. Basically what happens with the Chinese Exclusion Act is, remember all that racism that came out of the gold rush of Asian Americans? You guys remember that? As people came over? Well, now we're going to completely block it off. So what this is going to do, if you'll do like a 1, 2, 3. Number 1, it suspends Chinese immigration. Number 2, it limited civil rights of resident Chinese. And number 3, it forbade their naturalization. And I'm about to show you a political cartoon. I just want to emphasize, please no political comments. Thank you. Okay, so, for example, when we talk about the first one, which is the blocking of that immigration, basically what's going to happen is that we are going to put up this legislative wall, basically, that allows them not to be able to come into the United States. Is that wall existing in terms of limiting immigration? Does that exist for Italians?
No.
Nope. Does it? What about Russians?
No.
Nope. Who's it going to focus on?
Chinese.
The Chinese, right? And the Asian Americans. That's all it is. So we begin to block them off and we ban immigration to the United States. Now, if you see this one right here, you can see this white immigration coming in from Ellis Island, coming in freely, no problem at all, but who's being blocked over here? That Asian immigration. So you have that problem. Number 2, now you're going to have civil rights blocked. For example, if you think that segregated schools was only for African Americans, that's incorrect. If you go to California, you'll see several different schools that, for example, were just for Asians. If you came over here, you have to be in this school if you have Asian descent. Or you have to have a curfew at 8 p.m. where you're not allowed to come to go leave your house if you are Asian past 8 p.m. Other ones said you're not allowed to work for the city government if you are Asian. So we begin to block all these different things because of that racism that has existed prior. The last thing is you're not allowed to be a citizen. So a lot of these people couldn't even apply for citizenship because they had Asian descent. So you have a bunch of different problems that really stem out of the gold rush and continuing on through this time period. Now the last thing that we're going to end on, okay, is what happens in the cities with these immigrants. Now this guy named Lincoln Steffens comes out with this book called The Shame of the Cities. If you will highlight where it says political machines. Now what happens is that these political machines are going to be exposed in this book. So what is a political machine? What you need to highlight on this piece right here, you need to star the first bullet. In the second bullet, if you'll highlight special favors and the word rewards. In the last bullet, if you'll highlight Tammany Hall, immigrants, Irish, and then Boss Tweed is the last one. Which, fun fact, he actually messaged me during class today. He wanted to know about the interview. So it was like about schoolwork. But yeah, that's... Okay, so let me explain what happens. Okay? Now these political machines are basically going to be the people elected in the major cities, in particular in New York. They control everything. So this right here is the political machine. Now a political machine is an organization. Basically, their job is to choose who gets elected into the government. So here's how it works. Okay? You have the boss, which we'll talk about in a second, of the political machine. He goes and tells the immigrants, you need to vote for this person. If you vote for this person, it'll be beneficial to you. They then go and vote that person into office, and in return, they get better working conditions, better wages, things like that, favors. And it goes around in a giant circle. For about 30 to 40 years, pretty much everybody elected into New York City's government was staged. That was a person that they had chosen. This is going to be the next person, whether that person paid them money or not. And then they have this cycle of elections. Now, basically, this becomes corruptness in the cities. There's no real democracy because nobody's choosing it. The political machines are. Now, this cartoonist named Thomas Nast, who you should star, and make sure you highlight political cartoonist because he's a very famous political cartoonist. Thomas Nast, who you actually know from two different things. One thing that you know him from is because Thomas Nast created the modern-day version of Santa Claus, minus the smoking. He created this for a Sears catalog. Before, he wasn't like this jolly old St. Nick guy with the big red suit. He was just a dude. Okay. Now he has an actual look to him. He also, with this political cartoon, created the first images of the donkey being the Democrats and the elephant being the Republicans, and those are our current symbols of those parties. Well, what happens is he begins to create political cartoons against these machines. So you can see, for example, this is going to be Boss Tweed right here controlling the ballot box. Boss Tweed, by the way, is the head of Tammany Hall, which was the organization. Over here you can see he's controlled by money. This book causes people to stop trusting the government and ends up changing and reforming it, which we'll talk about a little bit later, okay? Now, if you'll quickly grab out your homework. That is the paper that you picked up with the chart. Now, if you guys remember, I had told you before the break that when you guys got back, we were going to do this really big project, and you guys all picked teams and stuff like that. Because of the fact that I know some of you are really stressed out for quarter grades, and you feel a little bit stressed out that you don't want to do a big project, I pushed it to the end of the unit instead of the middle of the unit. So what's going to happen is we push that back, but there's still some homework, okay? So for this one, what you're going to be doing is if you look at the strike side, or the labor union side first, do labor unions first. Your job is to basically research these labor unions and fill out the chart, okay? Each side should take about 30 minutes. Make sure, and if you want to write this down, make sure that you put like A-Push or Gilded Age when you search these. A lot of these still exist, and so you don't want to get them confused and start writing about some strike in like 2011 that they did, okay? On the other side, on the strike side, there's a lot of like Wikipedia articles that are crazy long about these events. I gave you some links on the side that might be a little bit shorter explanations. But your goal is by next class, it should take about an hour altogether, 30 minutes each side, is to fill out this chart. And if you want to work together with somebody else, that's fine too, okay? But your goal is to finish this chart by next class. Sound good? All right. We got like 10 seconds left, so you can go ahead and get ready to go.